Speakers, publishers, consultants, coaches, and info marketers unite. The Speaking of Wealth Show is your roadmap to success and significance. Learn the latest tools, technologies, and tactics to get more bookings, sell more products, and attract more clients. If you're looking to increase your direct response sales, create a big-time personal brand, and become the go-to guru, the Speaking of Wealth Show is for you. Here's your host, Jason Hartman.
Welcome to the show. This is Jason Hartman, your host, and every 10th episode, we do something kind of special, kind of different. What we do is we go off topic. So regardless of which show it is on the Hartman Media Network, whether it be one of the financial shows, economics, real estate investing, travel, longevity, all of the other topics that we have, every 10th episode, we go off topic and we explore something of general interest, something of general life success value. And so many of our listeners around the world in 164 countries have absolutely loved our 10th episode shows. So that's what we're going to do today. And let's go ahead and get to our guest with a special 10th episode show. And of course, on the next episode, we'll be back to our regular programming. Here we go. It's my pleasure to welcome Lawrence Susskind to the show. He is a Ford Professor of Environmental and Urban Planning at MIT. He's Vice Chair of the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School, Director of the Science Impact Collaborative at MIT, Founder and Chief Knowledge Officer of the Consensus Building Institute, and author of Entrepreneurial Negotiation, Understanding and Managing the Relationships that Determine Your Entrepreneurial Success. Lawrence, welcome. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much.
It's good to have you. So are you in Boston?
I'm in Boston, absolutely.
Fantastic. Okay, just wanted to check where you were. You said you were at the Harvard Faculty Lounge. Before we get into the topic of negotiation, one that affects everybody's lives and something I've done for a living for most of my life, negotiating real estate deals especially. Let's talk a little bit about one of my sort of hobbies, I guess, and that's urban planning. I've always found the way cities grow, the way they're planned, the way real estate is planned is pretty fascinating because it has such wide-ranging impact on the way we live, the way we socialize. I often think, what is the most important art form in the world? And I'd have to say it's architecture, number one. And just my own opinion, I think music is probably number two, but everybody's welcome to disagree with me. That's just mine. And, architecture I guess would include urban planning, I'd say, because we live in it. We interact with it all the time. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts about urban planning, what's good, what's bad, and then let's talk about negotiation.
Well, I've been teaching urban planning at MIT for next year's 50 years, and I've seen it change a lot, what people expect an urban planner to be able to do and what they think urban plans are supposed to accomplish. My view is that urban planning, is the purposeful intervention through a complex web of institutions to improve the quality of life in places and spaces. And that kind of intervention needs to be collaborative. And so while architects and architecture calls up images of a single person sitting at a drafting table, drawing an image and saying, this is a synthesis, it's elegant, it's purposeful, it's what we need, urban planning is much more about a process of catalyzing collaboration amongst the whole set of different actors. And the physical form that results is changing all the time. So what you need are agreements at various points in time about what are the most important problems that need attention. And then there's going to usually be some principles of stress and sacrifice, and those need to be negotiated. And then you make a change, and then you keep monitoring what people say and feel and what the market says, and you just keep on doing that. So a plan is no longer what we're educating people to produce. It's a planning process, and it's very much a collaborative process that engages lots of stakeholders and decision makers.
It's interesting when you look at the way America grew up versus, I've been to 83 countries now, versus almost every country. America has a love affair with the automobile. Back in the 50s, the oil companies and the tire companies, I guess Goodyear especially, they bought up a lot of these railroads and ripped them up, which is a shame. And I don't mind the automobile. I love it. And, we're about to have self-driving, autonomous automobiles in the not too distant future here, I think. But I really love walking-based communities, when you can walk to retail, when it gives people the opportunity to socialize and not just be in the burbs and come in and out of your garage and never know your neighbors type of thing. What do you think about that? What are the trends? We see this movement over the last maybe couple of decades where, the urban cores have been revitalized a little bit in a lot of cities. But, you compare America to virtually any city in Europe and they're very dense, they're vertical, where America's flat. It's just spread out mostly. Any thoughts about that?
Well, we got a big country, a lot of space, and the pieces of the country have developed in different ways at different times. We certainly have a lot of large cities, and as you said, those cities are going through a process of transformation for a whole series of reasons. And you've got a lot of spaces that are at much lower density, and they're not likely to increase in density in the near term. What you're likely to see are the big cities continuing to spread and capture more of the surrounding area. And it's not unlikely that 2/3 of the population will live in what we call, say, metropolitan urbanized areas in the not very distant future. And I don't think we're going to see that suddenly reverse. We had periods of time where people said, let's plan smaller scale cities and connect them by efficient transportation. And the problem is that kind of centralized planning never had a chance in America. The market rules, and we try to deal with some of the problems created by what the market does for certain groups. But we have a number of big cities and then a lot of low density open spaces, and I don't expect that pattern to change anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the self-driving car, the impacts of that? I think it's going to be a pretty major deal, if you ask me. I think that's going to be a game changer. It's going to free up a lot of real estate because parking lots won't be needed so much if there's sort of cars on demand, cars as a service kind of concept. I think it changes the real estate game a little bit, and I'll just tell you why. I've long said that the three major value drivers in real estate, and we have a lot of real estate investors listening to our shows, are, of course, we've all heard it, location, location, and location. But I think even though geography is important, it'll become less important than ever as transportation becomes easier, more convenient. Now, the one thing that has to happen is energy cost needs to stay low. But if it does, if the car will just drive you places and you can take a nap or do your work or whatever while the car takes you someplace, that's a pretty big deal, if you ask me.
I agree with you. I think autonomous vehicles could have a variety of important effects. I don't think the transition is going to be easy because a lot of people are going to be concerned that autonomous vehicles put cars on the road in ways that scare people. And even if they are safer for a variety of technical reasons, that doesn't mean folks are going to be ready to accept them. And we certainly have examples already of cities in the United States where experiments with autonomous vehicles have met with very harsh negative reactions from citizens. So I think they could make a big change. For myself, I'd personally rather see a different idea of personalized rapid transit, but on fixed systems. So imagine along all the existing sidewalks, there were what would look like monorails, except there's individual or double or triple or quadruple cars, and you just go up a couple steps and get in one and put in where you want to get to, and it takes you there. And nobody's on the road.
Right, but you gotta build those tracks. I mean, that's a lot of infrastructure. You mean sort of a people mover type of concept, or what do you mean?
Except that they're pods, and people are in them, and so they're people mover. Folks think about the airport, and just, moving from one area of departure to another.
Right.
The infrastructure is not that expensive,
Mm-hmm.
and you already have the rights of way, and you get the streets back. Just from a real estate standpoint, think about what that means.
Yeah. What kind of distances would those go, though? What is that, a sort of like within the
As
city,
much
a
as you
couple
want.
blocks, or is it long distance, or what? What is that?
There are models. My MIT colleagues have made models of different kinds of systems, and you could have systems at different scales.
Mm-hmm.
But I meant the idea of autonomy of the vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
People say, oh, good, I can have all the benefits of a car without having to own and maintain a car.
Right.
But you're still going to have traffic, and you may make it more efficient, but you're still going to have traffic.
Mm-hmm.
But what if you could take all the traffic away, all the delays away, all the air pollution away, and use existing rights of way, no costs for that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could swap the value added by taking all the roads and reusing them for development activity and walking and biking and other kinds of movement activity, and then use that to invest in the creation of the personal rapid transit. I'm talking about in dense areas. The traffic in Boston is terrible.
Oh, sure. I know.
And autonomous vehicles may make it run a little bit more smoothly, but it isn't going to reduce the worst traffic at key hours, because unless you rebuild the parkways and the highways and the roadways, you can gain some efficiency by having the cars run more smoothly.
And be
have the
networked
Boston
together.
drivers
Yeah,
negated.
right. Yeah. No, you can. But I've heard that the packing density of an autonomous vehicle could be 6 times what we have now. And of course, if they're networked together, they plan routes, they go faster, they can go 90 miles an hour right off bumper to bumper, in theory. Now, remains to be seen if it'll all work. But, a question for you on this sort of personal rapid transit, this kind of mini monorail, maybe I'll call it. It's a little pod that holds maybe up to 6 people. That would require building all that track, though, and that's the expensive part. I mean, whenever you got to build rail, whether it be monorail or, old-fashioned rail, that's a lot of money to do it, isn't it?
If you're thinking of monorail, where you have long cars that have to run on tracks, but think about just stringing wire.
Oh.
And having these pods, and the pods move along the wire. It's not the same kind of a cost
okay.
at all.
You mean like a ski lift, sort of, something like that? Or a gondola?
Right, but you can have as many of these as you want, and they just keep coming every few seconds, and you have to stop and have a way for people to get on, and then they just program in where they want to go. And you have a very highly networked, multi-directional system that drops you off where you want to go.
But it's literally a cable. It's a cable like a gondola, right?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I haven't seen that before. Well, anything more on urban planning? Let's leave that subject and talk about how these urban plans come about through the process of negotiation.
Right. We have no choice in both urban and rural areas but to involve people in decisions about how development's going to happen and how conservation's going to happen in ways that affect them. There's no way to go and back and say the experts decide this for us. So there is no development activity at any scale in the United States where there won't be some process of conversation in which people have a chance to have a say. The problem most of the time has been the model people have of that is a town meeting, and somebody presents a proposal, and then people go to a microphone and yell and scream for 2 minutes, and then they have a parade of such folks. And at the end of it, some agency's got to figure out what to do in light of all that noise.
Sure.
But we have now the technology to engage very large numbers of people in conversations in which it's not just vote on some pre-made choices. It's let's have a collaborative discussion about improving the design of this development activity or this development plan. And the negotiations can be assisted in a way now that allow a lot more people into the conversation to invent the choices, give them a lot more information about the forecast of the impact, and then have some selected set of people who represent different segments of the population in a face-to-face negotiation try to problem solve and come up with proposals to those with the formal authority to make decisions.
Sure.
So I don't see any scale of development where we couldn't do a better job of both allowing people in, preparing them to participate, and then carrying that through to the point of seeking informed, consensual proposals to elected and appointed officials.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that was actually just kind of a segue. We don't have to talk about negotiations in urban planning per se, but let's talk about negotiations in general. I mean, everybody negotiates all the time. Whether we realize it or not, we are all negotiating all day long. Even if it's not our business, we're negotiating with our kids, our loved ones, or, the person that's selling us something. How do we become better negotiators?
I think the single most important thing people can do to improve their negotiations is to become a bit more reflective. That is, before you start, think about what the interest of the other side's going to be. As you're going, take a break and see how's it going for you and the other side. Mm-hmm. When you're done, think about what you learned from that negotiation and what you want to try differently the next time. In other words, I don't think this is an issue of memorizing from some pages of a book 10 tricks about how to make deals, and then you're all set. You'll do better forever. I think each person needs to improve their personal theory of negotiation practice through reflection before, during, and after negotiations. It would make it, I can see it in how I teach and what I do to help people prepare for negotiations and reflect. They get better when they reflect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question about it. So the old saying, walk a mile in the other Indian's moccasins before passing judgment, right? Or as Stephen Covey said, and I don't remember exactly what he said, but look at it from the other person's point of view. And I think that is very important. Interestingly, a lot of times when we're in a negotiation, the other party doesn't really even want what they say they want exactly or what we think they want. When we really dissect it a little more, we really realize maybe we can give it to them and create a win-win solution in a different way, right? From a whole different kind of point of view.
It's a hugely important point that you make. I wish more people heard it and understood it and accepted it. Mm-hmm. People do not understand that other people may take a strong position, but in fact, that's just one way of meeting their interests. And if you don't ask a lot of questions and propose a lot of alternatives, you have no chance of discovering the way of meeting their interests pretty well and your interests very well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no question about it. It's amazing how when you dissect something, for example, a real estate example, the sort of the nothing down guys will talk about this, which I think there's a little bit of a myth in the whole nothing down thing. But in concept, the same is true. You're dealing with someone who wants to sell their property and they say, well, I want to sell the property so I can have cash to pay off this loan that I have. Well, what if you don't give them the cash, you just agree to assume the loan for them and pay the loan? Then, that's the concept, right? They didn't even want what they said they wanted, right? But they didn't realize, it's our job to think more creatively about how to get to the same place in a different way, isn't it?
I think that's perfectly said.
Yeah.
It's the distinction between the positions, as Fisher and Urey said in Getting to Yes. It's the distinction between the positions people take and the interests underlying those positions. And they take a position because they think they have to. They take a position because that's as much thought as they put into it. And then people fight about the position instead of saying, but why do you want that? Why do you think 6.8 is the right whatever percentage? Mm-hmm. What if I got you something better than that? They said, well, would you do that? Mm-hmm. Well, help me understand what's most important to you. Listen to what's most important to me. Let's see if we can invent something that gets your underlying interest met. And don't worry about the position you started with. Mm-hmm. But that requires treating negotiation as collaborative problem solving. That's what we have to teach people to do.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So it has, and I think on what I'm about to say, the feeling on this has changed over the years possibly, but you tell me. Some negotiators would say, the first one to mention a number loses. Maybe you've heard that. But others would say you're better off mentioning a number first because you sort of create the frame, you create the playing field. For example, like I'm trying to acquire another business right now, and it's not for sale, so there's no asking price. And it's pretty touchy to deal with the seller because, of course, the seller wants as much as he can get, and me as the buyer, I want to pay as little as possible, right? So how do we meet at some agreement that's mutually beneficial there? And
right.
So is it better for me to mention the number first, or is it better to let him mention the number first?
So there's lots of research now, serious scholarly research on the dynamic you're describing, which is called anchoring. If people read my colleague Max Bazerman at Harvard Business School, one of the most important authors on the subject. And the very simple response to your question is, if you know a lot about the other person's alternatives, the market in general, recent transactions related to this, if you really understand what the options are going to be that the person you're talking to is going to have, then by all means anchor first. Because then you will be in the space of zone of possible agreement, and you'll edge it in the direction that's best for you. But you'll know what the zone of possible agreement is. If you don't have that information, it's a mistake to anchor first because you'd be cutting off all kinds of possible advantage for yourself. So it's much better in the situation you described to say to this person, I think I'm interested in buying your company. What do you think would be a fair basis for considering the value? And you want them to tell you how they think about the value. You're not asking for a number. You're avoiding anchoring because you have no idea. But if they say to you, well, this is our profitability the last few years. This is our business plan going forward. We don't have any competition, and so we think we'll double. And they give you all that information. Then you have a basis for calculating, compared to other investments you can make. Well, this is what I would then say I would offer. And then, because anchoring is advantageous for the reasons that you mentioned, but it's disadvantageous if you don't have a sense of what the other person's alternatives are and how to think about the zone of possible agreement.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. Okay, so the answer is anchoring, it depends, right? There's not a...
But it depends on something specific.
Right, okay.
It depends on what knowledge you can put together with confidence about the zone of possible agreement and the other options the other person has. And the less confident you are about that, the more questions you want to ask to see if you can get a better picture of what the zone of possible agreement is. I have a book called Good for You, Great for Me, which explains this in some detail.
Very interesting. And I wish I would have done what you just said, was to ask him how he would arrive at the value. The same goes for real estate investors, ask the seller how they would, and rather than asking, and I think you said rather than asking for a number, just ask for the methodology and make the other side explain that. What I did, and it remains to be seen whether I'll be successful in my negotiations, is I didn't mention a number, and we've been talking for a while now, and I have still not mentioned a number. I did, though, mention my rationale and my methodology. And I said, the standard multiples in this industry are this amount. You're doing quite a bit of the work, so we need to assume we'd have to pay someone to do that work in order to have a value. And I still haven't mentioned a number, and neither has he. So no one's got a number here. He says the sort of the typical thing, well, I don't really need to sell it, et cetera, which is what you'll hear from most sellers.
There's another move you could make at this point, which is to say, if we value your company this way, then I could offer you something in this range from this to this. But if we valued it this way, then I would have to offer you something in this range from this to this. What do you think?
Yeah, okay.
So you're offering contingent options without a commitment.
Yeah, that's a good idea. It just keeps the conversation moving forward. I didn't want to throw out a number and insult the guy because that's what I was afraid of. Negotiation is a prickly thing, isn't it? How can it make us better leaders? I think you have a chapter head on that, right?
I think leadership, at least the service model of leadership that I teach about, requires persuading and influencing people who you report to, who report to you, and who are working with you to take action. And if you want someone to take action, giving them reasons is a good idea instead of demands. And so a model of leadership that focuses on helping people understand the reasons you're asking to do something, I would put a premium on it. I also think that leadership has to worry about, at any level, in any kind of context, has to worry about building trust. And if you want people to follow or to do what you want them to do, they need to be able to rely on you. You need to build trust. And we know that building trust requires saying what you mean and meaning what you say. And so leaders who are not really prepared enough to tell people the reasons to do things and who just tell them to do it without in any way taking the concerns of the person they're talking to heart aren't going to build trust.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. That's the foundational basis for everything. And you know what's interesting about trust is it not only matters with humans, but it matters with animals. A few years back, I got my first puppy, and I'd never raised a puppy, had many dogs, but never a puppy. It was really interesting to learn about dog training sort of from the beginning. And, a dog that is tabula rasa, just blank, right? Other than natural God-given programming. If the animal doesn't trust you, you're not going to get anything done with training. Even an animal, you make the animal trust you by being consistent and reliable and not teasing and, taunting. And if you put the food down, never take it away, right? Things like that. Those are all trust gestures. So it even works human to animal. That's very interesting. What else would you like people to know about negotiation, just to wrap this up for us?
I think a lot of the things that people want to get done that require getting others to do what you want, when you want, the way you want, are negotiations. And as you said, we negotiate all the time, and people are unaware that they have an approach to negotiation, even if they don't remember explicitly learning it. And if they don't reflect on it, it could be the reason they don't get the results that they want. I have a new book on entrepreneurial negotiation, in which all kinds of students in the dorm rooms at MIT are starting companies. And they think it's the essence of the building the company is the idea. And they don't get that they're going to have partners and investors and supply chains and consumers and regulators that are going to be nothing but negotiations. They say, well, I know, I invented this thing. I know about it. I can handle it.
Right.
And they have no training in negotiation, which is why so many new ventures fail.
Yeah.
So we're trying to teach students, I'm glad they're entrepreneurial. I'm glad they want to do stuff, but they must figure out that doing stuff requires all kinds of interactions that really are negotiations, and there are better and worse ways of proceeding. And it's not that hard to learn some ways of building trust and getting people to do what you want and persuading them and influencing them, even in unequal power situations, and then continuing to reflect and get better at it, but not if you're not aware of that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And now that you mention your MIT students, you made me think of something else, and that is not just the negotiation and what the message is back and forth between the parties, but I would say the platform on which you're communicating. The millennial generation has just got to get away from text-based communication, if you ask me. They've got to start talking to each other. It's amazing. I mean, just boggles my mind that people think that they can start and run businesses on text messages. Are you kidding me? There's so much more complexity to this stuff, and there's so much more nuance to it. Do you have any thoughts about that just before you go? I mean, am I wrong?
No, I don't think you're wrong. It's just I'm not hopeful that saying that is going to cause a reaction.
Yeah.
I think what we need to do, and all of the online teaching that I'm doing now about entrepreneurial negotiation, has people doing live face-to-face negotiations with a random person also taking the online course every week. And you can't send them an email. You're face-to-face. You have to be able to express your views. If you can't read the unspoken things that are going on, you're missing half the data that you need for the negotiation.
Yeah.
So it's not just stop just texting. It's don't give up access to all this important nonverbal information that can help you succeed at what you're trying to do.
Couldn't agree more. There is so much more data in voice-based communication and even more in in-person or at least video communication with some degree of body language. Absolutely agree completely. Lawrence, how many books do you have? My gosh, you have got a library of your own books.
Well, yes, but also I write them with colleagues, and when I want to learn about a new thing, I find someone who knows way more than I do, or even a student willing to work much harder than I can just on that one thing, and we write together, and that's why there's 20 books. So
Wow, fantastic.
Takes a while, though.
Yeah, good for you, good for you. Give out your website and tell people where they can find out more about you.
Well, entrepreneurialnegotiation.com is about the entrepreneurship book, but Lawrence Susskind, as if it were one word, SUSSKIND.MIT.edu.
Fantastic. Lawrence, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation. Love to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.